way, the first sort of main way that we're talking. Although the causes and conditions are a really great main way. I mean, you'll see that as we go through this, there is quite a bit of overlapping. You'll see. Because, like I said, with the diet, is the thing running?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Kathy. If the diamond is wisdom, we're looking at different facets, but we are looking at the same diamond, so many of these methods will sort of overlap with each other. So the first way is, the Buddha did this a lot, is he split the self down into different parts. And so when we look at the self, we go, here, look, me, I exist. There you go. But that's very general. So what we do is we split it, start splitting it down. Now the first split you could do is, first of all, take it into body and mind. Are you body or are you mind? And we talked about that quite a lot yesterday. Are we mind or are we body? Do we stand as body or do we stand as mind? But then what the Buddha did is he actually broke the mind down into another 4 parts. Okay? So sensations, feelings. So I've got a sensation of this, and that's called Vedana. And Vedana is either a good sensation or a bad sensation or a neutral sensation. So I feel good, bad, or neutral. So pain is dukkha Vedana, bad feeling, and pleasure is sukha Vedana. It's a good feeling. Yeah. The next is perception. So sight, sound is called samjna, and that is perception. Okay, that's another part of the mind. Yeah, so seeing, hearing, feeling, touching, smelling, tasting. Now the next one is mental formations. So these really are, you could call them thoughts. They are mental formations. They're a part of the mind. You can also, it's called samskara, and samskara also means like our beliefs or our attitude. So it's almost like your mental way, your mental patterns is maybe a good way of saying it. So we all have mental patterns. So for example, we might be an extrovert or an introvert, or we might tend to be judgmental or whatever. Those are patterns, and they are sort of samskara parts of the mind, and they influence the thoughts themselves. So these are the fabrications or the thoughts of samskara. And then finally there's vijnana, which is consciousness itself, just the awareness. So awareness would fall into that, is just your consciousness. So is there any, apart from those 5 categories, is there any phenomena that you call self that wouldn't fall into one of those 5 categories? Hopefully not. So the Buddha and everyone thinks that that's a good exhaustive categorization of, and of course you could break those down into other parts as well, but on a high level, that's a good place to start into breaking who he says the self is into these 5 different parts. Okay, so next we go to Chandrakirti and the unfindable self. And his methodology is, first of all, ascertain the object to be negated. So that's what we've been doing. Yeah? We've been ascertaining the object, which is the ego, which is how do we see ourselves as a self? Are we this body? Are we this mind? Am I an engineer? Am I a teacher? Etc. And then we feel into that self and see where it resides and see if it really is true. And we use often critical analysis to decide whether or not it is true. So this particular one is quite an intellectual process, and it's good for intellectuals. Now, we are going to use it in a moment on the 5 aggregates: form, Vedana, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. But to start with, just to get the ball rolling, Chandrakirti said, let's take a chariot, okay? So we could take a car. They didn't have cars back then, they had chariots, okay? But we could equally take a car and say, where is a car? Right? So where is the carness in the car? Yeah? You know, is it in the roof of the car? Is it in the seats of the car? Is it in the wheels of the car? Does the carness arise in the engine of the car? Or is the car a whole? The whole of the car? But if so, what if we took one part of the car away? What if we just took like a little bit of leather off of part of the inside of the back seat and we threw it in the bin? Does that then suddenly not become a car? So is it in the parts or is it in the whole? Because if you've got a hole and you take a little part away, it doesn't stop it from being a car. So it's the same discussion we had about the chair. When does the chair stop becoming a chair? When does the car stop becoming a car? You know, if you take off the bumper bar, is it still a car? You know, if you take out the back seats, is it still a car? You know, if you take off a wheel, is it still a car? There you might say, well, no, because it doesn't function as a car. Oh, so a car is in functionality. Yeah, if it drives, it's a car. So does that mean that a motorbike is a car? Well, no, that drives, but it's not a car. Oh, so what about hybrid between a motorbike and a car? Oh, well, it's not really a car, so we might call it a motorbike car. You know, where's the crossover? Yeah. So what we do is we're going to, in a moment, we're going to use the sevenfold reasoning and look at all these options. Okay. It takes a lot of, at first this can take a lot of thinking about, think, and then you finally realise, wow, there's no chariot in the chariot, there's no car in the car. But if you get proficient of it and if you get convinced of it, you can actually quite quickly use this as a, so you're sitting there meditating and you come up with a problem and you go, well, where's the problem in the problem? And you can quickly dissect it and it can disappear quite quickly. So although this might take a bit of intellectualization at first, it can become quite quick. So a little bit about Chandrakirti. He was a 7th century Dharma monk. He was the abbot, Chandrakirti was the abbot of Nilandra Monastery, which is a very, very famous monastery. In India. He was a scholar, he was a teacher, and he was a yogi. So often the yogis go in the caves, and the scholars go in the monastery, and the teachers often assume responsibility and run a monastery. Well, he managed to sort of be all three. So he was a yogi, he spent time, meditating for years at a time, but he was also very, very intelligent and a real scholar. And he was also became the abbot of a monastery, and so he was sort of like a teacher as well. And he was famed for his acumen and his intelligence and his cutting ability to debate. So in the Tibetan Buddhism and Indian Buddhism, before it got sort of taken over, there was a very, very big tradition, this today, of debating. And it was said at that time that no one ever debates with Chandrakirti. There's no way you'll ever win if you debate with Chandrakirti. He was the master of debating. So don't argue. King of logic, they called him. So he came up with this argument of the sevenfold reasoning. And so we'll look at a chariot, and then we'll look at the body, and then we'll look at the mind and things like that. So first of all, we'll say, the self, or the car, we'll use a car, is the same as its parts. So it's all of its parts put together. So is a car the same as its parts? Alright? And you can say, well, it has to be either some of its parts, or one of its parts, or all of its parts. Yeah? Which one is it? Is it all of its parts, or just some of its parts? And you could say, well, if it's all of its parts, then if you take one part away, a very small part, is the chariot still a chariot? Well, yes, it is. So it can't be all of its parts. But it also can't be one of its parts. Or it even can't be a few of the parts. Right? So it clearly can't be the same as its parts. And not only that, all of the parts are often dependent on the other parts. So you can't have a wheel without an axle. And you can't have the axle without the pins that hold it onto the chariot. And the chariot can't be there without sitting on an axle. Okay? So it can't be that. So now we might see the same thing is, if we are our body, we can say, okay, well, I am my body. Okay? Now, if you're your body, are you the whole of your parts of the body, or are you one of the parts? Yeah? So you could say, well, you know, I'm obviously not all of my parts, because if I chop a hand off, I'm still Peter Radcliffe. You know, I don't feel, don't have a hand, but really, essentially, I still feel like I'm the self. So the self is not in one of the parts, in the whole. Okay? So maybe it's in a part. Well, a lot of people would sort of say, well, it's in the brain. You know, if I'm a brain, if I'm anything, I'm my brain. But what if you there are people who have a lobotomy. They take half their brain out and they're still alive. And they would still say, no, I'm still a self. But then you could take the other half out and you'd still be alive and you're still a self. So there's no you in the brain. Yeah? So, or if you took the brain out of the body and you somehow preserved the brain, are you still a self? So it's not the same as. So then the next person will say, well, it's other than the parts. So it's not the parts, it's something separate. And this is the idea where soul comes from in the Christian tradition. Is, well, I have a soul, and when I die, my soul goes up. Right. So let's look at the chariot. Is a chariot separate to the chariot? If so, where is the chariot other than its parts? Can you find a chariot that is somehow separate to a chariot? Yeah? So if we say that there's a chariot and it's separate to the chariot, if we start taking all the parts of the chariot that are not the chariot away, and we eventually take all of the chariot away, where is the chariot? It's not there. So now let's apply it to ourselves. So if we have a soul, and we say, okay, well, if I'm a soul, that means that I can take the parts away from the soul. So let's take a hand away, let's take a head away, let's take the eyes away, let's take, the lungs away, take everything away. So where is the self? There's no self there. It's unfindable. This is the unfindable self. So let's take. Oh well, that's because I'm perception. Yeah. You know, perception is Are we perception? Are we? If we are we sight, hearing, feeling, tasting, or touching, or are we all of those? Well, we're not one of them because there are blind people. There are people who can't see, and they're still self. Yeah, that's the first argument, same as its part. And then the second argument is, well, we're something other than parts. So we are perception, but if you take all of that away, where are we? If there's no perception, then where is the self? Alright? Same with mental aggregates. So, we are the thoughts. So you can deconstruct thoughts. Well, if you're the thoughts, are you the loving thought? Or are you the hating thought? Or are you the jealous thought? Or are you the action thought? The talking thought? Now, which one of those thoughts? Oh, well, I'm all of them. Well, if you're all of them and you take one thought away, so you can't be the same as thoughts. So are you other than thoughts? So if you take all the thoughts away, where are you? If you can't think anymore, if you're other than thoughts, not there. You can deconstruct all of this stuff. Alright, so the next one Chandra Kurti says that people would argue is they say, okay, I agree, I'm not the same as my parts, and I'm also not other than my parts. I depend on my parts. So I'm here, and I'm here as long as my parts are here. But I'm not my parts, but I do depend on my parts. So I disappear when my parts go, but while my parts are here, I am here, and I am dependent on my parts. And think about you, like when I question, how do you know that you are a self? Think about how you define yourself. Do you define yourself as the parts? Do you define yourself as separate from the parts? Or do you define yourself as dependent on the parts? So, Chandra Kurti, who is, don't forget, the king of logic, came up and said, well, he says, he said, like, for example, a car depends on its parts, or a house is a house dependent on 8 rooms. He said, if you have 8 rooms in the house. And so like that, a self depends on the aggregates, so the 5 aggregates. But in a way, if you look at it, how can you be dependent on the parts? If you're dependent on the parts, you have to be either other than those parts or the same as those parts. How can you exist to be dependent on parts if you're not either other or the same? Like, if you think about it, there is no way you can be dependent on the parts without being other or the same. And if you're other, then we've already refuted that. And if you're the same, we've already refuted that. So the third argument has to fall into one of those 2 previously discussed baskets, which has already been refuted. So again, the self is unfindable. So, then Chandra Kurti says, well, some people would argue, well, all right, I give you all of those. But what I would say is there is a self upon which the parts depend. So there's a self, and then the parts are dependent on the self. So it's like a self that contains parts. So sometimes this is considered like the big self. There's the big self, and then dependent on that, the parts arise. Yeah? So it's like this, it's like a force in the universe that gathers the parts together. But again, this is starting to sound a bit like this idea of something other than, so like a soul, but maybe a big soul rather than a small soul inside you. It's like you're a big soul. And in fact, there's lots of other teachings that I've heard that say you are not. One very famous teaching that says something like, you are not in the body is within you. So this idea of the body is within me. And by the way, some of these views are, again, like stepping stones, because awareness is like that. We can see awareness as oneness, and we are within awareness. But Chandra Kurti said, well, that's fine as a stepping stone, but ultimately how can you have something larger than yourself upon which you depend without either being separate or part of? How can that exist? So he says if you really critically think about that, there can't be a larger force on which you depend without it either being separate to or part of. And if it's separate to or part of, then it falls into one of those previous categories. And it can't be both at the same time. You can't both be, it's a part, it's a force, but it's also part of the parts. And it also says if the parts can sort of gather around this particular force, but the force can exist without the parts, then why do you need the parts? You don't even need the parts because you're saying that you're dependent on there is a self upon which the parts depend, but actually really those parts don't even need to be there for that to exist. But of course, if the parts don't exist, then we don't exist. All right? So then they say, well, someone might come along and say, yep, well, I get all those four reasonings, but the self really is a possessor of the parts. So we own the parts. And this is very, very common when people say, this is my hand. Look, this is my hand. This is my arm. So again, these are all, the reason it sounds a bit sort of, we're going a little bit sort of teaching the suck eggs or sort of basic here, but realistically, these are the views that we unconsciously held like that. Because if we say this is my hand, we've got this idea that we somehow, there's this me that possesses the parts. So we intrinsically know that the hand is not really me, but we have this idea that, well, we possess a hand. Okay? We possess a mind. We possess a heart. But who possesses the mind and the heart and the hand? Who possesses that? It's unfindable, isn't it? You can't find anything that possesses those things other than
consciousness.
So consciousness. Well, who possesses consciousness?
It just is.
Just is.
Just because.
So,
Don't go down that road.
I say that all the time.
So if
Just
consciousness,
because.
when you're under anaesthetic, consciousness disappears. So where does it disappear to?
It's snoozing.
It's snoozing. It's gone. There's no consciousness when you're deep in anaesthetic and even deep in sleep.
Yeah.
The consciousness disappears.
But the being doesn't disappear. Like, not consciousness as in mental awakeness, but
Yeah.
consciousness as in just being, just
So how does
existing.
how does
That doesn't cease to exist.
Okay, so how does it exist?
Just does.
Just because.
Just
Just
because.
because. But it's unfindable.
It's unfindable.
So
But
how do
it's
you know it really exists?
so is it real then?
It's empty of intrinsic reality. So you can't find it. So you might as well say it's
Not
not
real.
real. It's not real.
It's my mind.
Certainly, they will never ever find a scientific instrument that says, well, there's a being that is separate to consciousness. They'll never find a being that is separate to perception. Because what is consciousness without perception? You imagine if you were blind, deaf, dumb, couldn't feel a thing, you had no sense perceptions whatsoever. What is consciousness? So consciousness depends on perception. So they all even lean on each other, all these aggregates. And you can't have perception without having the rupakai, without having an eye. Alright? So, we can't be the possessor of its parts, but this one really is a common one, okay? Because this is how a lot of us really perceive, is there's this existential I that possesses my parts and has some sort of control of the aggregates. So I can control my hand, so there must be this I that is sort of separate to and possessing my hand because I can control the rupakaya, the body. Kaya means heap, like a pile of stuff, and rupa means form. So we've got a pile of form, a pile of consciousness, a pile of perception, a pile of vedana, which is feeling. Vedana kaya. So, my hand is meant to pull away from being. And need my glasses, but there. That's really an important point. So if I can't read it, it doesn't really matter. I sort of made that point. Alright, so if we're not the possessor of the parts, then maybe we are the collection of all the parts together. So we could say, well, yep, okay, got that, we're not separate, but we are the collection of parts, just like a car is a collection of other bits and pieces together. Yeah? So we're the sum of all 5 aggregates. So if this were true, if there was just a collection of parts, then in a way it wouldn't matter whether that collection in what order it was. So you could have a pile of hands, feet, legs, perceptions and all of that in a pile on the floor and it would still be a self. But we know that's not the case. It has to be in a certain order. The feet have to be down below, the legs have to be up here, and then the body. So we can't be a collection of parts because those parts have to be in a certain order as well.
I keep thinking about that guy in the wheelchair that was really smart. What's his name?
Stephen Hawking.
Yeah. Yeah, he was pretty much just conscious mind, I don't know. With a higher perception.
And so if we were just a collection of parts, then what is the point? We would just be this collection of parts moving around in the world, bumbling along, you know, the perceptions, vedana, a pile of bones walking around. But we seem to be more than that because we seem to have this idea of free will. And we can, so we're not really just a collection of parts. There's something more to us than just the collection of parts. Yeah? So even if you got all my parts and put them together in a pile, that would not really constitute me. There would be something more to it. Then where is that more to it falls into other than its parts. So the final one is the shape of parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, so this is the 7th one, is the shape of its parts. We are the shape of its parts. So if we're not a pile of parts, then we are the actual shape of how the parts are put together. That's what the defining thing is. It's the order in which so we're not really the parts, and we're not other than the parts. We're just the way the parts have been put together in a certain way. So this is the opposite of the collection of parts, you could say. Yeah? Yet, in the same way, we can change shape. So there is a certain amount of change. Even if I change my arms from up here to down there, I've just changed my shape. So if we can change shape, then we therefore can't be the shape of our parts. So the final one, the final 7th pin falls over, and all the parts have fallen over, and no one can think of any other way that people can define themselves other than these 7 different ways. And also, mind is a part of us, but mind has no shape. But also with the shape of, and the other one thing here is, they say, yes, well, we are mind, and we're not the mind as it is, but we are the continuum of the mind. So this is actually a very, very common one, is I am, effectively, I am my history. So I'm everything that's happened from when I was born up until where I am today. So it's how my mind has grown through that journey is who I am. So this is sort of fits into this, well, this is the shape of me now, is dependent on the shape that my journey took through life. That's a common one, isn't it? I think we can all relate to that.
What about the connection to each other? Because then it becomes a oneness, doesn't it? All of us are one thing.
Yeah, we can get to that if you want to argue that in a minute.
I
Let's
know.
just stick with shape of its parts. So this one is a very deep one to ponder, and it can be very, very attractive to hold. And so this one is something that feels good to hold, that we have this shape of the mind as it's a continuum. So mind as a continuum. We are a continuum. So one way to get over this is seeing the emptiness of time. So how can we be the shape of a continuum if that continuum does not exist? Because there is no past, is there? If there was a past, show me it. Where's the past? There is no past. We only ever live in the present moment. So if we believe we are a self, we have to be in the present moment. We can't be the shape of the past because the past doesn't exist. So it's one way of getting over this idea that we are a continuum of mind. And also this continuum also would seem to imply that if we're kind of this continuum, we're going through the present and into the future. And of course the future is not real, clearly, because the future doesn't exist yet.
But everything we are up until now, from the past.
Because otherwise half the continuum isn't even been created yet. So therefore, are we only half a being if we haven't finished the future? Are we the same self as when we are when we're 90? Because when we're 90, we're only halfway to 90. So we can't be halfway, so we can't be a continuum. Yeah? Well, it doesn't mean we didn't exist when we were younger. Of course we existed then. So thinking about that, we can't be a continuum mind. Sorry, what were you saying?
So if we're everything we are till now from our past, it makes it difficult to live in the now. I mean, I know that living in the now is what we're about, but if we're everything that we are from till now, it's hard to let go of that.
There is a past then, really.
No, it's hard to let go of that, you know, like, and live in the moment.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, but if you let go of it, you'll find freedom.
Yeah. So
why not let go of it?
What, like drop it like the ball?
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is it. Like no, I am my past. We're grasping. It's causing us suffering. Clinging to it.
Just a memory.
But it's just a memory. Like
And then
people.
you can recreate that.
Yeah, memories can be not always true as well.
No, correct.
Oh, absolutely.
People like a lot of Dharma, a lot of NLP work is around past trauma. Yeah. So working with past trauma, but in fact, like in this class, we would say to drop it because the trauma does not exist. You can't tell that to clients. They go, I can't. You know, I'm out of here. I'm not even going to pay the bill. That's ridiculous. Drop my trauma. I have been affected by my trauma my whole life.
Hanging on to
I'm
it.
hanging on to it for dear life. So you can't do that. But in transcendence, it's as simple as that. Just drop it. It doesn't exist. You're just keeping it alive as a memory. Why bother? It's only causing you pain. Just drop it.
Isn't NLP coaching about going through the trauma?
Yeah, but
Yes.
then
You'd like
then
to
you
say,
drop it
you'd
at
like
the
to
end.
say drop it.
Because
but
that
no.
might be easier than
That's-
dropping it.
And dropping it
is,
straight away.
dropping it is it's
Not
hard.
straight
to-
away. Oh, okay.
You got to
Sometimes
work
you need
towards it.
acknowledgement.
It's a kind of
Yeah.
process
It's a
of
hard.
getting to that.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
See, if I hadn't experienced it myself, I don't think I would have believed it. But the spontaneously through the process of the meditation journey we've been on this year, which others might already have surpassed that journey or not started or be in it, is that that your body does unintentionally, or maybe it's a flaw of the body, but remember everything and store everything. But that by deep meditation, that there really is this spontaneous arising of stuff that then heals. We
Can
called
be
it,
released.
yeah,
Let go of.
yeah.
Comes up to be looked
So-
at and released.
Yeah, so for me, one of the powers of meditation so far has been that I haven't needed any more, not a bit. I probably have needed it, but not a lot of therapy, because meditation has been the therapy. So and an example is for me that every time I meditate and get still and quiet, like this year, I would cry. I'd just realize I am incredibly sad. All this sadness would arise, and but I didn't have to process any of that sadness. It just arose and it's gone. And I've just started now meditation that there's this spontaneous joy arising, and I haven't had to plan it or think it or even desire it. It's just has. So that's all fitting in what you're saying, isn't it? It's. Yeah, but part of that is the past. If it does get stored in is there a way to prevent that storage in your body that's subconsciously there that might not be serving our needs?
In the
Is there a way right from
Massage.
birth to not store that, so you never need to purify? You're just living a pure life from the day you're born?
Not really.
No.
I think evolutionary, that's probably helpful, because to store the bad things, people remember the bad things to survive. So
Yes.
unless you're awakened from birth,
Well,
you
you're
can obviously
totally right.
once you're awakened, then you can stop
Totally
storing
right.
more things. But
Yeah.
I think it's sort of we've evolved a little bit that sort of helps us to store the trauma so we don't
Can
do
survive.
it again to
Yeah.
survive.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make us happy. It just makes us alive.
And
Same.
as an analogy, I see like that laptop, it's got all the stored all the information, and our body has all the DNA, right? So the information of computer DNA in the body, and of course we've collected it, and I truly believe, like especially in the short time I've been at my volunteer job, that the power of touch can remove some of that. I mean, yes, there's counselling and Peter's saying drop it, but I can't tell you the women, their stories I don't even want to go into, like they're so horrific, and they've never been touched, never, like they've never done self-care, or they can't justify having, or they can't afford it, and in a heartbeat they'll either go blah about their life, like because you're looking like this, or they'll cry. And I truly believe that that's a great question, that how do you remove like all this stuff, and you can, whatever it is, like it's why we do Reiki, it's why we do massage, it's why we do foot massage, it's why we do acupuncture. It's moving, and so many people don't do it. They don't
Understand it.
Well, they don't invite themselves to do it. It's really sad.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Like I'm constantly massaging myself. Part of that is like I'm a touchy-feely person. I don't get to express it, but I truly can see how healing it is. 100%.
Yeah, I think what's common is we need to be in a kind of a safe area, and when we feel safe, we can let those things arise and spontaneously. Sometimes spontaneously liberate, other times you have to do it through therapy or through massage or whatever.
Yeah, it's got to be safe.
But you know, the self is holding it there. The self is the thing that's holding all of those things
Yeah.
together, because it doesn't want to let go of that trauma, because that trauma makes me who I am, a victim. Well, of course I'm a victim. I had this trauma when I was younger. How dare you question me to be a victim? You know? How dare you tell me that I can stand on my own 2 feet and be empowered? I could never be empowered because I've got this, no? So they're blaming a trauma for their current circumstances. They don't want to give it up because they're afraid of then they have the responsibility to stand up and be a person. You know, it's part of it. But this is all unconscious, so you can't blame them for it. It's not like they're to blame for it. Anyway, so if we can get rid of the self, we can let that stuff come up. And getting the self out of the way, it'll do the work very quickly. It'll come up and it's gone very, very quickly. But Curti says, identify the way you hold, how you conceive of yourself. Do you conceive of yourself as any one of these 7 aggregates? And if so, rationally think, is that a valid way of the self existing? And you have to use your rationality, and you come up, you go, well, no, it's not. And then you're in this existential dilemma. Well, if it doesn't exist, how, you know, well, and then what happens is the mind goes, okay, well, I exist another way. So there's a story of the kink in the carpet. So you have a kink in the carpet. I don't know if you've ever done this when you're laying carpet. You've got a kink, I can't do it here, and you push the kink down here and pops up over there. So you push that one down and pop, it goes up over there. So this is what happens when we delete the self. We go, thank God I'm rid of the self. But then suddenly you find, actually now I believe myself is consciousness. Now I believe in the big self. Now I believe in the cosmic self. So the self pops up in another way. And you have to pop that down and so keep doing it until all the selves are gone. So there are some more waves of selves, which are sort of the same as these 7, but I'll talk about them because they are often what you hear people say. So the first is the owner of the aggregates, which I think we've really said upon it. So similar to above but independent from. So it's like we've been given the aggregates. So it's a bit like a soul, and that we have been given the aggregates, and this idea that I wish, when people say, I wish I could exchange this body for a new one. You hear people say that.
No, so my patients say, I'd like to rub myself out and start again.
Yeah. You know, people can say it with a part of their body. They say, I just need a new set of legs.
Yeah.
Or they can say, well, I wish I could have the whole. So what are they saying there? They're saying I'm sort of the owner of the body, but I could replace the body and I'd still be me.
Well, trade it in.
Trade it in. But who are you if you're not part of the parts? Like, that means that you're a separate part. Okay? The possessor, a processing time of the aggregates. So this is getting a little bit less common, but for a long time, people believed we're a process. Actually, by the way, this is a really good way to look at it for the time being. So this is a really good stepping stone, is to see that you are a process in time. So I'm an unfolding process. So, and that sort of goes in with that sort of going with the flow and the cause and the aggregate. This me talking to you is simply just a process that's going on. Yeah?
That's how I describe myself at the moment. It's a work in progress.
A work in progress. Yeah.
I'm looking at from myself.
Yeah, so you're just some cosmic dust that's formed and into this point in time, and then you're going to disappear, and you're just this little process in time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, it's this idea there's no free will, there's just this process going on. It's nothing to do with you, it's just the way the universe is, and somehow we've mistaken it and put a self into it. So it's a very good way to kind of take a step through. But even that is still attributing some sort of a self there. A web of interconnected causes and conditions. Again, very similar to the other one, but and also very liberating, is that we are just a complete, interrelated web of infinite causes and conditions. So right from when our mother and father got married and conceived us, that's sort of one condition. But everything that has sustained us, educated us, taught us, influenced us in any way is part of us. So it is actually part of us. So that movie we watched back when we were teenagers, that is part of who we are. And really, when you think about it, it's infinite. So, that tree over there is part of who I am, because it may have influenced me in some way. Just by looking at it, it's influenced me. So it's a part of who I am.
I love that idea. I've thought of that before. Like that table. We all see the table, but we don't just see the table. We see the table with whatever's happened to us around tables, and if it's similar to our table, and it's just it's the same table, but it's a completely different table to every single person. Yeah.
So that's why the table's not really a table.
Yeah.
You'll see it differently.
Yeah.
But this is also, for example, we see a table, but we don't see the wood that it came, the tree that it came from, the beetles that used to live in the tree that helped shape the wood, the woodcutters that came from Ecuador over to here and worked as a woodcutter, and his teachers that taught him how to cut the wood so that the table was shaped that way using technology that was made in England, where they, so that in itself represents an infinite web of causes and conditions that have all come together just to make one table.
But that goes one step further. If you said, I don't know, everyone described that sunglass case. If you went around the room, everyone would have a different description about it. So that's the cause and effect. That if you try and say, like, no one knows you like you do, and if you're trying to explain something and you haven't explained it even to yourself outwardly, truthfully, that's cause and effect. You get yourself into trouble.
Yep. So that's another one. Alright, so next one is the cosmic self. So this is a common one today. I am the cosmic self. I am one with God. Okay? Or the other thing is I'm a vast awareness. I'm one awareness that holds everything. Again, this is actually very useful, and it's much, much closer to reality than us seeing us as an individual self. So awareness is implicit in everything, and we are manifestations of awareness. So it's this idea of the big self or the cosmic self or this God self. We are actually just reflections of God as a self. So God is in everything. God is in every being. It's also even in every in the book, and we are just sort of reflections of that higher purpose. Okay, but again, ultimately falls into one of these things. So that means why would God need a body? So why don't you just get rid of the body? Are you still a self? Well, no, I'm not really a self if there's no body. But you just said you're everything. Yeah, well, I said that, but I still want to be a self. Do you know what I mean? So where is it? So those are other ways of seeing things, but far from we're almost finished. Far from sort of putting down those views, actually those views can be very, very helpful as stepping stones. So it's actually good when you hear people say, you know, I had this experience in meditation where I was a cosmic self. And you say, good, go with that. Become the cosmic self. And after a few years of being that, someone might come along and say, you know that idea of cosmic self? Are you still the cosmic self? He says, no, I realised eventually that doesn't exist either. So, but certainly in a way we're aiming for that. We should be encouraged to go for that because it's a big step forward from where we're at the moment. All right, so that is Chandra Kirti's Carrier and the Unfindable Self is these 7 reasons. And so if you learn these 7 reasons, you can, if this idea of a self arises, you can actually go, which one does it fit into? And, you know, what does it logically imply? And generally it comes back to you're either a separate self other than the aggregates, or you're all of the parts, or you're some of the parts. And all of those have they're clearly wrong. So any questions?
Peter, have you written them down on that board over there?
I can write them down on another piece of paper.
The one, the board that you've got up there.
Yeah.
You've got other sheets under
Other
there.
sheets under it, yeah. So I can write them up.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good to have.
Yeah,
It's been
visual
good to
of
have
them.
them there for the last.
Yeah, I'll
24
write them up
hours
and then I'll stick them up.
Great. Such a visual
Yeah, good idea.
person.
All right, so we'll leave it at that.